Hey, Recreators, this is Nick, and you're listening to the Life Recreated podcast, the show that dives into learning, healing, and growing after spiritual abuse. Each week, we tackle the difficult conversations so that we can walk in the freedom of Christ as a new creation. So if you're ready to learn, let's dive in. Hey, what's going on, Recreators? Welcome back to another episode of the Life Recreated podcast. So glad that you're joining us here today. Listen, wherever you're listening at, whether it be on iTunes, Spotify, if you get some value out of this episode, do me a favor. Drop a review down below. Definitely helps us out. Just getting some feedback on how you're enjoying the show. But today I'm super excited about what we're going to be talking about today. Today we're actually jumping in to a series where we're talking about how to heal the soul. And in this episode, we're going to be addressing and looking at the fact that we need to embrace a journey mindset and we need to accept what has happened to us as we begin this healing journey. So buckle up for this one. I feel you're going to get some value out of it. Definitely let me know. Give me some feedback as we jump into today's episode. Listen, anybody who has gone through a journey of healing can probably agree with me that it's probably some of the most painful experiences that you've ever gone through. But at the same time, it can probably be some of the most rewarding experiences that we go through. If you think about it, it's a process just like everything else in life. So listen, if you're ready to learn, let's dive in. How do we heal the soul? And the reason I felt like this was so important, and the reason that I felt like this was a topic that I wanted to dive into and talk about was I began to start thinking about this new year. I began to start thinking about going into 2022, and I began to start thinking about the past few years. And one of the things that I realized was going into 2022, it marks the 5 year mark of me leaving a spiritually abusive situation, spiritually abusive church, and I realized, wow, you know what? This has been a 5 year journey that I've really been on as far as healing my own soul and learning how to heal my own soul. And so I thought going into this year, going into 2022, what better way to start the year off for anybody that might be out there, anybody that might be listening, that might be going through this journey themselves, with diving into and really looking at and really starting to understand, how do we learn how to move forward? How do we learn how to start healing our souls? How do we learn how to start growing? How do we learn how to start just pressing forward in our own lives based on what it may be that we probably experienced in the past? And so that's what we want to talk about today, is how do we heal the soul? Like I mentioned, it's been 5 years for me. And if you've been watching the show, when we wrapped up the end of last year, we were talking about spiritual abuse. We were talking about how to identify spiritual abuse overall, whether in a church or whether in a similar organization. We dug down a little bit deeper and we started to talk about, how do we identify a spiritually abusive leader, looking from an organizational view and then looking at it more on a leadership level. How do we identify those things? And those things are good. It's really good for us to identify, how do we know whether or not we're in a spiritually abusive church or in a spiritually abusive organization. But when I began to start thinking about this upcoming year, I started thinking about, based off of conversations that I've had with other folks and feedback that I was getting, was it's good for us to identify those things, but how do we take it a step further and how do we really start healing from those experiences? Because make no mistake about it, a lot of times men and women that have gone through those situations and have experienced those things, they're hurtful situations that you got to go through. There's a lot of pain associated with it. There's a lot of hurt that's associated with it. There's a lot of feelings. There's a lot of emotions that you may have thought like that you wouldn't have experienced, or even thought that, even fathom that this was going to happen leaving the church. And so I felt like in my heart, and as I began to meditate on this, was like, okay, how do we learn and how do we just really identify what the steps could look like for our healing process? Now, let me preface this. Let me make a disclaimer. Everybody's healing process is going to be different. You know, what you may go through and what you may be experiencing right now could be completely different from what I've gone through and what I've experienced. But as a whole, when we look into these topics that we're going to talk about this evening and we start to look at the beginning steps of healing, we begin to realize it's a journey, it's a process that we got to go through. And I felt like jumping into 2022, I really wanted to talk about how do we learn how to start healing the soul? Because that's really what's important. We can identify everything that maybe has happened to us within a hurtful experience. We can identify everything that's maybe we've seen in leaders or maybe the way we've been treated. But at the end of the day, what's important for us is to learn how do we find healing in that? Because when we clear everything else out, I feel like that's what God is really trying to get us to a point is to figure out how do we get healed? How do we get whole? And so we're going to start to talk about the first few steps that I identified within my own life and within researching this and looking at that I believe that are some of the first steps that we can really find healing for our souls. The Bible tells us very clearly in the book of John, verse 30, chapter 8, verse 36, it says this: if the Son sets you free, then you'll be free, really free. So when we look at that and when we look at what the word of God is saying, God's desire for us, especially when it comes to healing, especially when it comes to us dealing with a hurtful situation, is that God wants us to really be set free. He really wants us to be healed from this traumatic events. He really wants us to be healed from spiritual abuse, whatever it may be. He really wants us to live a life from freedom. And so we're going to look at tonight, how do we heal the soul? How do we begin to start healing the soul? How do we begin to start processing that within our lives? And so the first step, and we're actually tonight, we're just going to talk about I think just two steps that I identified and I looked at where I believe is the starting point for us to learn how to start healing. And the first step and the first point that I want to look at is this: is that we got to embrace the fact that what we're dealing with here is a journey. And what do I mean by that? What do I mean when I say that this is a journey? We got to understand, and this is what I recognize going into 2022, is that over the last 5 years, this has been a journey that I've been on in my own healing process. And so I realized that as we are moving through and understanding like what we've experienced and maybe the hurtful things that we've gone through, it's wise for us to recognize that the path that we're on and the path that God has placed us on when it comes to our healing is based on having a journey mindset. I would love to tell people that if you've been hurt in a traumatic situation, if you've been hurt from spiritual abuse, if you've been hurt by somebody that you love, that in a month, everything is going to go away and everything is going to be back to normal. But if we be honest, a lot of us got to recognize that's not always the case. A lot of times we've got to recognize that our healing is going to take some time for us to be able to get to that place. And it's going to be a journey. Now, here's the thing. Your healing journey could be completely different from my healing journey. What may have taken me 5 years. I just started this show maybe a couple months ago, and this is the first time after 4 or plus going into 5 years that I've really felt comfortable even just talking about the things that I experienced and the things that I went through. And so I recognize here that my journey may be completely different. Somebody could have gone through the same thing that I've experienced. And within a year, within 6 months, they're fine. They're back to normal. Within a couple months, they're right back to life as it usually is. But the key thing for us to recognize here when it comes to the recognition or when it comes to the understanding of how we need to heal our soul, we need to recognize and embrace the fact that this is going to be a journey. This is going to be something that we're going to have to walk through and we're going to have to deal with maybe on a daily, a monthly, maybe even a yearly basis. We're going to have to recognize and embrace the fact that if we've been hurt in a situation, that this may take time and we've got to embrace the journey situation. I think that when you look at the fact that the fact that this is a journey, I know a lot of people don't want to hear that. A lot of people don't want to maybe think about it in that type of mind. But when you look at that and you look at everything in life, you realize everything is a journey, right? Everything is a journey. I think there's a very famous quote that says, journey of 1,000 miles begins with the first step. And so for us, moving into 2022, especially if you're coming out of a spiritually abusive situation, especially if you're coming out of a hurtful situation, it's so important for us to recognize that it's important for us to recognize that this is a journey that we are on. And so that's the first thing I want us to think about and recognize is that we're on a journey. And the second thing that I want to look at this evening when we think about that is the need for us to accept what happened to us. Acceptance is such a key word. I think acceptance is such a important word because when I look back on, let's say, for instance, my own journey and the things that I went through and the things that I experienced, one of the most difficult things that I think was for me to wrap my mind around was the fact that what I was experiencing was actually happening. And a lot of times we can find ourselves in these situations of traumatic situations, hurtful situations, and it's hard for us to accept the fact that what we're experiencing and what we're going through actually happened. Or in the case of, let's say, for instance, spiritual abuse or a hurtful church situation, it's hard for us to accept the fact that this happened to us in church. One of the things that I really struggled with at the beginning of my own personal journey was really wrapping my mind around the fact that God would allow me to experience or go through the situation that we experienced and what we went through. And so I remember looking back on a lot of our experience and realizing that I was in denial a lot of what I was actually facing, what I was actually feeling, what I was actually, what were the emotions that I was going through? What were the thoughts that I was actually having? What were the pains? How did all those different things feel? And in the beginning stages, it was a lot of denial. It was a lot of like, man, you know what? I know that this person wouldn't have done this to me. I know that God wouldn't have allowed me to go through this. I know that what I'm experiencing is not supposed to happen. This is not supposed to happen. There's all these different things that go through our mind. But I realized and I recognize, especially after reflecting on this year and reflecting on what we've gone through, how important was it for me in order to move forward to accept the fact that this really happened, accept the fact that this hurtful situation really happened, and really embrace that. And I think looking back on it, that took me a good 3, 4 years to really accept the fact that, you know what? Yeah, this really did happen. The person that hurt me really did hurt me. Or how I'm feeling, what I'm experiencing really did happen. And it's okay for us to do that. But I think that acceptance is such an important part because without acceptance, I personally believe that it's going to be hard for you to move forward in your journey. Without accepting the fact that, yes, this did happen. Yes, this person did hurt me. Yes, whatever the experience was took place. Without us actually accepting that, it's going to be so difficult and it's going to be so challenging for us to move forward because if we don't accept it, the other side to that is we're going to be in denial, not complete denial, but we're going to be in that denial. We're going to be in that space where we feel that the experience that we're dealing with or the thing that we're going through, it's something separate from us or outside of us. And when we begin to learn how to accept the fact that this experience did happen and God allowed it to happen for a reason, we may not know what it is at the time. I didn't know what it was at the time. I didn't know that 5 years from me walking away from that experience, I would be here sharing my experience with you or sharing the steps that I went through in my own personal life. I didn't know that would be the case, but at the time, I needed to learn how to accept the fact that this was happening. And so for us, it's so important for us to begin to accept the fact that this hurtful situation and what I'm going through and what I'm experiencing, it really did happen. It really did happen. And there was a reason that God allowed it to happen. That's so important. If we look at the scripture and we can look at what God deals with when it even talks about acceptance, I feel like acceptance a lot of times will help us to learn and understand, okay, what are the steps that we need to take to forgive that person that really trespassed against us? When we look at the word of Matthew chapter 6, verse 14, says this: if you forgive others the wrongs they have done to you, your Father in heaven will also forgive you. So when we look at that, when we see, okay, I accepted the fact that somebody did me wrong, somebody maybe have hurt me, or I was in this situation or in this difficult situation, it allows us the steps and it allows us the opportunity to take those next steps forward and saying that, you know what, now I can move to that point where I'm able to forgive somebody. I can move to that point where I'm able to have that conversation with somebody that maybe hurt me or maybe has done me wrong. When I accept the fact that, hey, this is what happened, this is what I experienced, I can now move into that different space and move into that different area and arena in my life where I'm able to forgive those. And once that begins to start happening, that's when we begin to start seeing a lot of the healing. The Bible also tells us in Colossians chapter 3, verse 13, that bearing with one another and forgiving each other, whoever has a complaint against anyone, just as the Lord forgave you, so also should you forgive. And listen, what I'm encouraging you with, those steps that have to happen for us has to start with us accepting the fact that the situation that we're feeling or the situation that we're dealing with actually happened to us. And so wrapping our minds around us is going to be so key and so important to us beginning to move forward in our healing process. Until we accept the facts of what happened to us, it's going to be hard for us to move forward in our journey. And this is what ties in to what we were talking about at the beginning, right? If this is a journey and this is a process, we have to learn how to accept the fact that this happened to us in order for us to be able to move forward in our journey. And so these, I feel, are the probably the main. I look back on the last 5 years, these were probably the most crucial steps for me to wrap my mind around. To wrap my mind around the fact that this was going to be, I'm a very straightforward type of person. I really wanted, when I got hurt, that in the next week, next month, I'd be good. I'd be back to normal, be back to operating the way that I did. And when years went on and it didn't happen, I recognized that this is a bigger thing, that this is a journey that I'm going to have to embrace and that I'm going to have to walk through. And when I got to the point where I could finally accept the fact that what happened to me or the trauma that happened or the things that, are going on in your mind and your heart, they actually happened. When I actually accepted those things, I feel like when you look at those things, those are the moments when God can really begin to intervene, right? When we're living in the denial, when we're living in the kind of like the opposition of it, we're kind of like pushing God away. We're not wanting, we're saying, God, hey, listen, I want you to come. I want you to help me. I want you to deal with these different things. But until we just accept the fact that, hey, look, these things definitely happened. This person did what they did. They hurt me the way that I did, the organization, whatever the case may be. But until I was able to actually just accept those things and embrace those things, it was very difficult to move forward. And so, when we look at, as I begin to land this plane this evening, how do we begin to start healing the soul? We need to embrace those two things. We need to embrace the fact that this is going to be a journey. And then we also need to accept the fact that what happened to us, and this is going to help us to move forward. And so, as I wrap up, I want to ask a couple questions. What makes it so hard for us to accept that we've been abused or that we've been hurt? What is it that's within our minds, maybe within our hearts or whatever the case may be? What is it inside of us sometimes that accepts or is so hard for us to accept the fact? I can tell you for myself, it was having this persona, maybe this mindset of thinking that nobody could really hurt me, right? This indestructible mindset, this mindset of saying that nobody can hurt me, nobody can get through my walls, nobody can get through those different things. And that's what a lot of the times was so hard for me to accept those different things. It sometimes can work from the inside out. Oftentimes we fake it until we make it. However, you can't heal anything you're not willing to face. This goes back into us talking about acceptance, right? Being able to accept what we're going through, accept the things that we're facing. So what else? If you're watching this on a replay, I'd love to hear in your comments below. I'd love to hear what your thoughts are on why sometimes it's so hard for us to accept the fact that we've been abused or we've been hurt. This part of my healing process, but the reality of it is until we accept it, it's going to be definitely difficult for God to get involved. And then the next question I had as we wrap up is this: where are you at in your healing journey? Like I said, if you're on the comments now, drop a comment below. Where you at in your healing journey? If you're watching this on the replay, I'd love to know where you at on your healing journey. I think one of the most important things, and this is probably something we're going to talk about a little bit later, is I think it's so important, it's so imperative, especially as a community, for us to talk about where am I at? How do we begin to start learning how to find that healing within our lives, learning how to allow God to heal us, especially if we've gone through a hurtful situation. And so, as we continue to move forward, I just want to encourage you, man, just to keep pressing forward, to keep, embracing the fact that we're on this journey. And I want to encourage you also keep tuning in every Thursday at 7 p.m. I got some good thoughts, some good ideas coming, got some good interviews that I have planned and lined up that I want to bring that I think is going to help and I think is going to bring some encouragement to you. And as always, my hope for you and my encouragement to you is let's just continue to keep just learning. Let's just continue to keep healing. Let's continue to keep growing. And so I want to encourage you. I want to continue to keep diving in a little bit deeper into how to continue to heal. Like I said, this is a process. It's something we're going to go through. And we're just going to dive into a lot of different things. We're going to dive into a lot of different topics. We're going to dive into a lot of the nitty gritty of it. And make sure you like, make sure you subscribe, share this with somebody that you may find some encouragement for it. But until next time, listen, this is Nick, the Life Recreated Show. Check us out, all the platforms, trying to do a lot of things. I'm learning a lot, going to give you a lot. So until then, let's just keep learning, let's keep healing, and let's keep growing. And I'll catch you next time.